In less than 200 years, this exact rock will hold one of the richest, most crowded places on Earth. You're standing on a bare gray rock, rising out of the South China Sea. Behind you, steep green mountains drop straight down into the water. In front of you, a narrow channel of deep, dark blue. There is no city here. No towers, no lights. Just a few fishing huts, some boats, and the faint smell of incense drifting off the water. In less than 200 years, this exact rock will hold one of the richest, most crowded places on Earth. More than 7 million people, stacked into glass towers that climb the hillsides. So why here? Why this steep, farmless rock, and not the flat, fertile land just up the coast? The land is about to explain itself. Look down at what you're standing on. It's granite. Hard, gray stone. The hills are too steep to plow. There are almost no rivers, almost no flat fields, almost no fresh water. If you were a farmer looking for a home, you would walk right past this place. For thousands of years, most people did. But now look at the water in front of you. That narrow channel is the whole story. It sits between the rock you're standing on and a wide peninsula reaching down from the mainland. The water in it is deep, very deep. Deep enough for the largest ships ever built to sail right up to the shore and drop anchor. And the mountains that make the land useless for farming do something else. They wrap around the channel and block the wind. When typhoons roar in off the sea, this pocket of water stays calm. Do you see it now? This isn't a place to grow food. It's a place to shelter ships. The Chinese had a name for it long before any city existed. They called it the fragrant harbor. Say those words in the local language and you get something close to Hong Kong. The name most likely came from the incense trade. Blocks of fragrant agar wood were grown inland, carried down to the coast, and shipped out from a small harbor on this rock. The scent of that wood hung over the water. A fragrant harbor, with almost no one living beside it. For centuries, that's all it was. A scatter of fishing villages. Boat people, called the tanka, who were born, married, and died on their boats, and rarely set foot on land. Salt pans along the shallow bays and pearl divers working the coast. The little harbor of Aberdeen on the south side of the island sheltered the fishing fleet. In the year 1841, only a few thousand people lived on the whole island, and almost all of them made their living from the sea, not the land. Then, everyone from the other side of the world arrived, and they wanted the harbor. By the 1830s, British traders were desperate for a foothold on the China coast. For years they had been forced to do all their business far up the Pearl River, at the port of Canton, under tight Chinese control. They could only stay part of the year. They could only trade through a handful of licensed Chinese merchants. They hated it. What they wanted was an island of their own, with deep water, that they controlled completely. Meanwhile, they were selling opium into China, illegally, and making enormous profits from it. When the Chinese emperor cracked down and destroyed their opium stocks, Britain sent warships. This was the first Opium War, and China lost. In 1842, the Treaty of Nanking handed Hong Kong Island to Britain. The British didn't want the rock for its soil. They wanted that deep, sheltered channel. A free port at the doorstep of the largest market on the planet. Somewhere they controlled completely, where ships from anywhere could come and go, and trade without paying Chinese duties. Watch the empty spot start to fill. The British declared it a free port almost immediately. No tariffs, no barriers. Bring your ship, unload your goods, load up again, and sail on. Word spread fast. Merchants came. Warehouses went up along the waterfront, right where the deep water met the shore. Behind them, a grid of streets was carved into the lower slopes of the mountain. They named the settlement Victoria after their queen, and they named the channel Victoria Harbour. The city could only grow in one direction at first. Up the hill, in a thin strip, squeezed between the water and the steep granite peaks. Every piece of flat ground was precious, so they made more of it. They blasted rock off the hillsides and dumped it into the harbor, building new land out over the water. That reclaimed shoreline is still growing today, almost 2 centuries later. The population climbed. Chinese workers, traders, and craftsmen crossed over from the mainland, drawn by the money moving through the port. Within 20 years, the island held more than 100,000 people, and the city split itself by height. The rich built their homes high up the slopes on Victoria Peak, where the air was cooler and cleaner, and the views stretched across the whole harbor. The poor crowded into the hot-packed streets down by the water. In 1888, a steep cable railway, the Peak Tram, was cut into the mountainside to carry people up. The higher you lived, the wealthier you were. On this rock, even the geography of class was written straight up the hillside. But Britain wasn't finished. It wanted both sides of the harbor. In 1860, after another war, Britain took the tip of the Kowloon Peninsula on the mainland shore. Now they controlled both banks of that deep channel. And in 1898, they leased a much larger stretch of land behind Kowloon, the New Territories, for 99 years. That 99-year clock, started in 1898, would one day decide the city's entire future. Remember that number. For now, the map keeps filling in. Docks, shipyards, a cathedral, a cricket ground, banks, trams running along the flattened waterfront, ferries crossing back and forth between the island and Kowloon, stitching the two shores together across the harbor. Hong Kong had become an entrepot. That's just a fancy word for a middleman port. Goods from China flowed out through it to the world. Goods from the world flowed in through it to China. The city didn't need to make anything. It simply sat on the best harbor for 1,000 miles and took a small cut of everything that passed through. And a small cut of the trade between the world's biggest country and everyone else adds up to a fortune. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, the whole story changed. In 1949, the communists won the civil war in mainland China. Millions of people fled south, and many of them poured into Hong Kong. In just a few years, the population doubled, then doubled again. Refugees crowded onto the hillsides in shacks. It looked like a disaster. Too many people on too little land with almost nothing. But those refugees included factory owners from Shanghai who arrived with their machines, their money, and their know-how. And they found a city full of people who needed work and would work hard and cheap. So the middleman port became a factory. Watch the map change color again. Textile mills, plastics, toys, cheap electronics. Hong Kong started making things and shipping them out to the world through the same harbor that built it. By the 1970s, Made in Hong Kong was stamped on goods in shops across America and Europe. And that harbor had one more transformation left in it. In the 1970s, the world switched to shipping cargo in standard steel boxes. Containers. It needed deep water and huge open terminals to stack them. Hong Kong had the deep water already. It built the terminals. For years, this single harbor handled more container traffic than any other port on Earth. The money piled up, and it needed somewhere to live. So the warehouses along the waterfront came down, and the banks went up. Higher and higher, because there was still almost no flat land, and the only way to build was toward the sky. The thin strip of Victoria, once a row of trading houses, became a wall of skyscrapers pressed between the mountain and the sea, their lights reflecting in the harbor at night. And that 99-year clock? It ran out in 1997. The lease on the New Territories ended, and Britain handed the entire colony back to China. But by then, the fishing villages were long gone. In their place stood a global center of finance and trade, home to more than 7 million people, built on a rock that couldn't grow a single field of rice, so step back to where you started. You're standing on that same bare gray granite, with the steep mountains at your back and the deep channel in front of you. You just can't see the rock anymore. 7 million people are living on top of it, and they came for the one thing that was here all along: the water.